and UF's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. These entities and so many people on the UF campus are working really hard to figure out how we and our students can create a better world. Chris Gaja thinks a lot about that too, and not only that, he gets paid to think about it, even though Patagonia's ultimate job is selling outdoor gear. Chris's love of wild places began in childhood, mucking about in creeks and sloughs in what was then rural San Diego County in Southern California. Since then, he's lived a variety of outdoor lives as a climber, skier, trail ultra runner, and angler, explorations intertwined with diverse professional lives as an art director, writer, and editor, high school teacher, and now global marketing manager for Ventura, California-based Patagonia. As global marketing manager for Fish and Field at Patagonia, Chris promotes the company's gear and its environmental projects all over the world. Chris will be interviewed tonight by Dr. Kristen Joyce, Director of the Social Impact and Sustainability Initiative in the Warrington College of Business. Kristen has taught UF undergraduate and graduate courses on social entrepreneurship and sustainable business since 2005. She's passionate about empowering students to use the skills, strategies, mindsets, and competencies of entrepreneurs and change makers to create innovative and sustainable solutions to social, environmental, and economic problems from Gainesville to global. Patagonia's mission statement is, build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. With that, we are ready to be inspired, and for the audience, rest assured we'll have plenty of time for your questions after Chris and Kristen's conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Professor Barnett, and thanks to all of you for coming out tonight. It's really an honor and joy to have you all here. So, Chris, we just heard from Professor Barnett that your title is Global Marketing Manager of Fish and Field. Can you tell us about that role at Patagonia and what a typical day, because I'm guessing this is an atypical day, what a typical day looks like for you?
Sure. First, I just want to say thanks for having me here. It's been really engaging and awesome. I mean, your students are mind blowing, just in their focus and questions. It's been great. Yeah, I mean, a typical day for me, and I guess I should clarify, like I am a global marketing manager at Patagonia. We have a variety of them for each of our sport categories, and I am in charge of our fly fishing line and then also our workwear line, which falls under, internally we refer to it as our field wear business unit, but it's outdoor work clothing. And my typical day really is like, a lot of people who work in these roles. You're dealing with all the normal functions of marketing, of making sure that your storytelling is out there, that you're planning for future seasons, that you're keeping track of, how you're doing in retail, how you're doing in the wholesale channels, all of those things. But then mixed into that, there's also a typical, maybe not on a daily basis, but during any given week, there are other things like taking 2 hours out to go and listen to. We had a couple weeks ago, we had Dr. Ratan Lal, who's a soil scientist, come in and talk about locking carbon up in soil. So everybody in the company going for 2 hours to hear this talk about the importance of this regenerative organic program that we're working on with Rodale and other people to try to solve global climate change and global warming. So, it's the workaday stuff and trying to make your product competitive and do all of those things mixed in with this, with this whole other slice of responsibility.
Sounds like it's always coming back to the mission.
Yeah, it is, absolutely, yeah.
So, since many in our audience are students who are planning their future careers after graduation, I understand that you majored in creative writing, and then you taught high school for more than 10 years before you landed a job at Patagonia. So we'd love to hear how you parlayed your experience in education into a career working for one of the most impactful retailers in the United States. And maybe if you could share a bit about how your major in the humanities comes in handy for you in your job in marketing today.
Okay. Yeah, no, it definitely is a mixed bag for sure. I mean, I've often joked with people. I'm like, I think I'm basically unemployable. I have always pursued whatever I was interested in, and so as such, I've done all these different things. But ultimately, yeah, I studied writing. I studied creative writing, and I studied fiction and poetry. And I also studied photography, although it wasn't a declared major, but I spent a ton of time there. And, that was always tangled up with my love of just being outside and pursuing the sports that I was interested in. So I got wrapped up in the idea of climbing, in my senior year of high school probably, and started pursuing that. And so, having grown up on great storytelling, and in my bio that I sent over, talking about those early experiences, mucking about in the backwaters in San Diego, that is really where my love of the outdoors began and my connection to landscape, and so that I feel like all of that mix led me into wanting to be, a biologist. I wanted to be outdoors. I loved fish. I loved these environments. I wanted to be a biologist. But then when my math skills and my chemistry skills reared their ugly head, I found myself thinking, I really like stories and storytelling, and maybe being an English major is really where it's at for me. And so that I pursued that interest along with the sports side of my life and as the things that I loved, and I never really thought about studying writing as like a career path, like, oh, I'm gonna then turn this into teaching. And I remember people asking me when I was graduating from college, like, oh, are you gonna go into teaching? And I was like, no, why would I go into teaching? And of course, I was, part of that was because I was solidly hooked in the climbing industry at that point, at least working. I had just started working at a climbing brand called 510. So working on the industry side of climbing and just being connected to the sport that way is where I started taking my experience with words and with image and with, being a member of that sport community and then doing communications based on that. So that was something that I always believed in, sort of learning on the job and learning in the trenches, and that's something I definitely did in that industry. I left the climbing industry in the sort of mid '90s and freelanced, doing the same thing, working for a lot of different clients, and I felt a little bit burned out on just doing that work without the connection to the kind of the common value or the shared experience, because I was doing work for a variety of clients, and just doing the work itself, I just didn't have the same feeling as like being with people that you shared that love with. And so I started thinking about, well, I wonder if I would like teaching. And fortuitously, there was a job posting at Bishop High School in the Eastern Sierra, which is a place I had spent a bunch of time as a climber an outdoors person. And so all the work that I'd been doing as a freelance creative was sort of my entry to the classroom there. So I went up there as a 1-year experiment, basically, to see. I'll try teaching and see how I like it. And I taught design to high school students. So I took that thing, and that 1-year experiment then turned into an 11-year experiment, which, and I feel like it is an experiment every year. You go in the classroom, and that group of students that you have is always different, and you are the ones that are building that thing every year. Like, you come in, the school is just a building, and you come in and you inhabit it and you animate it, and you bring all of your experiences, both as an instructor and your students do the same thing. So you build something new every year, and so that was what I was doing when I got a call from a friend of mine who I had known from the climbing industry and had been at Patagonia for a couple of years, and said, "Hey, I need you to look at this position that we're flying, because I think that you would be great because of having this mixed background both in creative communication, having this mixed background in sport, and all of those things just kind of came together, and that's how I ended up. That's how I ended up at Patagonia."
Thank you for sharing that story. I think sometimes students think that careers are very linear and all planned out in advance, and what we often find is that the things we're involved in open doors for the next opportunities that we never imagined possible 10 years prior.
Well, and I think when you're engaged as a person with learning, when you have curiosity, when you have that natural questioning of things, whether it's the really simple stuff you ask when you're a kid, which many of the questions that children ask are really brilliant questions. They're so fundamental. And I think when you carry that questioning, when you have that process of questioning and self-examination and all of that, it leads you where you need to be.
Mindset of curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Can you share with us a little bit about Patagonia's history in terms of how Yvonne Chouinard, an avid climber and surfer who had no interest at all in business, came to launch what is now one of the world's biggest and most successful outdoor clothing companies? And I'm certainly not asking you to distill like 45 years of corporate history into a concise response, but some of that turning point.
Where he transitioned from just being Chouinard equipment into Patagonia, into making clothing.
Or even deciding to make Chouinard equipment because what he needed didn't exist.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it is the history is well told in a few places, so you can certainly dig into it more deeply than we have time here. But yeah, he really. He was a vanguard in his day in climbing, obviously did really pioneering ascents really around the globe with a really interesting group of people, to say the least. But yeah, he created gear. He just had that mindset of tinkering, of taking an existing idea and saying, this isn't really doing it. I think most notably, probably for Chouinard equipment, was when he famously started out as a blacksmith hammering pitons, essentially out of the trunk of his car, and doing it so that he could go climb and he could go surf, and he would sell the pitons for, I don't remember the price, $1 a piece or something.
And pitons are those sharp things that you would use if you're climbing a mountain?
Yeah, a piton is essentially a wedge-shaped piece of metal with an eyelet on it that you can clip a carabiner to and clip your rope through after you beat the piton into the crack in the rock. And so that was the accepted method of protecting of free climbing in the day, and also just doing aid climbing, where you're pounding this stuff in and literally hauling yourself up the rock in certain sections. But so he had a pretty successful business doing that, a very specialized business building these pitons. And then in 1974, he switched completely to this idea of clean climbing, this idea of creating these removable chalks that weren't scarring and permanently damaging the resource, because he saw, look, this is, there are finite lines in Yosemite that can be climbed. And so, that mindset of, the mindset of quality, I feel like that came from being a climber and knowing that he was staking his life on this gear that he was making. The climbing community was extremely small at that point in time, and so you knew that you were also staking the lives of your friends or people that you knew on the gear you were making. So that is something that idea of absolute quality, I feel like, came, it was present then. The idea of innovation, of preserving the resources, that was present then. And it went on just with Chenard equipment, and his desire to have clothing that also stood up to the climbing that he and his friends were doing is what led him to start importing products. So like famously importing rugby shirts from England, because he was like, man, these are great for climbing. They're tough. The collar pops up, and protects you from the sun. It protects from slings. And that at least was the seed for Patagonia, and obviously it's come along it's come a long way since then, both in size and sophistication. But I feel like the values that are inherent in when we think about it came from that idea of and there's a quote in I think in Let My People Go Surfing, where they talk about that kind of moment where they really shifted to the idea of, okay, we're going to make clothing. And they really saw it as really it was equipment for this experience as well, but it was going to be made out of material. But the same mentality, the same ideas of quality and durability would go into it.
So you just mentioned his book, Let My People Go Surfing, and I just realized this is probably a better place for these. My next question is actually about the second book, but the second edition of the second book. So in The Responsible Company, he talks about what responsibility means. And when you were just talking about his first company, Chouinard Equipment, and you didn't use the word responsible, but he had tremendous responsibility on his shoulders if his life and the lives of his friends were resting on the quality of that equipment. So I wondered if you could share with us about what responsibility means at Patagonia.
Well, I mean, responsibility, we feel a responsibility to, to the planet. We feel a responsibility to our employees. We feel a responsibility to our customers. I mean, it's talked about in a variety of ways. The book describes it. I feel like the most succinct way is that that idea of the triple bottom line of we're responsible to be a healthy company and to do business in a way that we're a healthy company. We're taking care of employees, we're taking care of customers, we're taking care of the people who make our product, and then of course taking care of the planet that everything depends upon.
So I was actually going to ask you about that triple bottom line. So last week I attended the first ever gathering of all of Florida's certified B corporations, and we only have 21 here in Florida, but there's about 2,600 around the world. And two of the CEOs there remarked that after reading Let My People Go Surfing, that was a turning point for them, and it became a catalyst for their shift from business as usual to leveraging their business to be a force for good. And Patagonia is a certified B Corporation, which I know you know, and for students in the room who don't know what that means, it means that you've gone through a rigorous third-party assessment to show your impact on the environment, community, workers, and the transparency of all your corporate governance practices. And as the slide I think says up there, B Corporation certification is what business is to business, what fair trade is to coffee, or USDA organic is to apples, or LEED certification is to green building. So certified B corporations like Patagonia don't just measure your success by your financial bottom line. Instead, you take into consideration your impact on people and the planet and prosperity. So in addition to being a certified B corporation, Patagonia is also a benefit corporation. Can you share with us what that means and why it matters to you?
Well, I think that it's one of those things where People talk about corporations making decisions where it's just about profits and shareholders. Through this certification process, we also are actually we end up. It's not just a choice, but you're legally required to consider all of those other bottom lines. Like that becomes part of the company. Like it is absolutely an indelible piece of that. So it really is. I suppose ultimately it's putting your money where your mouth is there, because it is absolutely built in to those articles. So you end up with real legal responsibility to that. So people will, people, organizations or companies, they can do the right things when everything is going great, and then when things go poorly, they can decide, well, we need to scale back that thing because we can't afford to do it. And I feel like when you're in that B Corp, you are bound to do it. So it's I think it's just taking it to that next level.
I think I hear what I hear you saying is that it's not just a marketing tactic
No.
at all. It's
No.
baked into the DNA
Yes.
of the company and everything you do.
Yeah, it ends up becoming a legal part of who you are.
So in Let My People Go Surfing, Yvonne mentions that that part of the inspiration for the way he runs a business is wanting to have being part of the lives of his employees. And I know students have asked this before, so I'm asking for the students in the room. Can Patagonia employees really just pick up and go surfing anytime the waves are nice?
The answer to that is yes, with caveats. I think some people think like, oh, the office gets shut down and we all go surfing. I can assure you that when the swell is coming, if you're walking around the offices, you will see people, their computers, they will have the swell map up, and they will be watching the surf cams and the swell map, and there's buzz that's going on. But it is still a place where we're trying to get stuff done, and so as long as things are covered and you've got it handled, people are heading out there. And my experience coming there for the interview process that I went through, our front desk receptionist Chipper Bro, who's really a fixture at Patagonia, he took me in the entrance of the building where there's this big wooden stairwell, and there probably were 40 or 50 surfboards leaned up there, and he's like, and this is our boardroom? And I was like, I see what you did there, yeah. So yeah, it's real. People do surf. It is a thing.
And I'm guessing maybe you could do the same thing on a beautiful day, go for a run or a walk or...
No running. only surfing. Actually, it's funny because we had an event where it wasn't an event, but we had a few of our trail running ambassadors. So these are folks who routinely are running 100 miles in the mountains, and they were all there in the cafe, and Yvonne was there, and he was just having rotator cuff surgery, I think, on his arm. And I'm not going to say that it was his casting arm that he uses the fly rod with. But he's talking to the trail running ambassadors, and he says, like, yeah, you really got to watch out for that repetitive activity sport, of running. And I was thinking, like, oh, yeah, moving that fly rod is... people do all kinds of stuff. People cycle and run and do all kinds of things. Like at lunch, you definitely see it looks like a reverse anthill. Everybody is pouring out to go do their thing. So it's great that way.
I'm going to switch gears entirely for this next one. Can you give us an example of a challenging situation or an ethical dilemma that you faced in your time at Patagonia and how you chose to deal with it?
Man, there's a variety of things. I feel like when I first got hired at Patagonia, I was a catalog managing editor. So I worked in a writing role. And in that writing role, you're trying to communicate really complicated, sometimes very complicated things about the business or about an environmental issue or any number of things there. And you also get called on to, and those are the things that you plan on trying to communicate. And then sometimes you get called on to communicate things that are unplanned, things that come up, and like, well, how do we talk about this? How do we get this information out? And so, there are times when you're struggling to be transparent without opening yourself up to exploitation or whatever from having transparency. And I spoke about in one of the ethics classes that I came to, where we were working on a program where we were grazing sheep in Patagonia and using these holistic range, the estancias that we worked with used holistic range management practices. And so the idea was that based on this research of grazing these animals in a way that sort of mimicked the patterns of the animals that were there before they were displaced by 100 years of sheep ranching, that you could help restore denuded grasslands in Patagonia. And so we ended up being attacked by an animal rights organization for some of the practices that were going on I don't know the number of estancias, but it was a limited number, and that had to do with animals that were slaughtered for meat and things like that. And so you're trying to communicate with customers about the program, about this wool program, and you're trying to communicate with them about the realities of sheep ranching or whatever it is, and you want to be open and transparent without without just having these very emotional and disturbing images of lambs being slaughtered or things like that. And so those are moments where you really have to think very carefully about what you're doing and how you're talking to customers. And there's never a really tidy way through it, but those are things where people really get focused and try to do your best work.
I know yesterday when we were talking, you mentioned that you have a PR office, but they don't like that it's really part of the culture where you come together these situations, and it's not that you just spin off some defensive response from your PR office to try to simmer things down.
Yeah, no, we definitely try to engage on these issues, and I think another program where we were working with on where we're sourcing down from Eastern Europe. And that, again, that's a meat industry. And so there were animal rights groups that said, oh, we think that there is force feeding and live plucking going on in the supply chain. And rather than just saying, oh, no, we've never, that nothing like that is happening, we're like, we're going to look into it. And that's what we did. And we went and dove into that and, and went to a really deep level on, third-party verification of the supply chain and the custody of the feathers that came off of these different farms. And so, supply chains, global supply chain can be really complex, and I feel like that is one thing that Patagonia has never shied away from, is really digging into that thing, understanding what's really going on, and then making changes based on that. So. But that transparency there's a vulnerability to it. I mean, there's obviously strength in being transparent and and sharing what you find out. But there's certainly vulnerability in it. And I mean, our communications department, they actually absolutely do engage in those things, but it's not like a siloed thing. They draw on all the stakeholders who have an understanding of the process, who have an understanding of the supply chain, or whatever it is. Lots of people get involved. So.
So you just mentioned your first position involved writing for Patagonia,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a lot of journalism and communication students in the audience. And so I wanted to ask you about storytelling as part of Patagonia's work. Your catalogs are known for their long-form stories and incredible vast photographs rather than price lists and featuring the clothing only. And I also know that Patagonia produces documentary films, most recently one called Blue Heart about saving the wild
Mm-hmm.
rivers of Europe. Can you talk about the culture of storytelling at Patagonia?
Yeah, it's. I mean, I feel like storytelling is a long part of our history, especially in catalog. Um, I think that long form piece is certainly something like when I was a younger climber, those field reports, those kind of like experiential pieces from the field were a big part of what cemented my love of the company. And I think that that's true of a lot of people. People can recall, oh man, remember that one field report about the Fun Hogs trip or whatever it was.
And thankfully, they're all archived online. So if you
Yeah,
want
most of them are archived. Although I think as the list gets longer, they eventually move them off. But yeah, I mean, the storytelling is a huge piece of it because that is, it's part of living an examined life. I feel like both as a person. Most of the sports that we pursue are these kind of solitary, individual things where we're, um, it's part of examining who you are and putting yourself through tests to find out kind of what you're made out of. Not in that, not in kind of the conquering hero way, but really, that thing that Yvonne talks about, living an examined life. And I feel like sport and that storytelling is part of it. So.
So I heard that I've heard Yvonne talk about having a pretty small advertising budget, that it's only something like 0.5% of your sales. Is it fair to say that storytelling usurps advertising at Patagonia, or are they different? I mean, I assume you have an advertising office
Well, we're all it's
team.
it's kind of a one and the same thing where we have a creative services department and yeah, we're all working together. And Yvonne famously says in his book, and he also says it any time at the company when we have questions, but he just says, marketing is just telling the story of who we are. So telling the story of who we are sometimes is telling the stories from these sport communities. Sometimes telling the story of who we are is telling the story of our child care center. Sometimes it's, telling the story of how we're sourcing things or why we're involved in, fights over public land or whatever. So I think that when you're doing that, when you're sort of looking at who you are as a company and who are your friends, and you're telling those stories, that does a lot of the heavy lifting. And it's not to say that we don't have an advertising budget. Like in the fly fish line, I have ads in the Fly Fish Journal and Fly Fisherman Magazine because we are a business and we need to let people know about new product, and that's still a good way of doing it. But the long-term value and the long-term brand building, I feel like really does come from that community-based storytelling. Telling the stories of the people.
So you just defined marketing as telling the story of who you are, and I've been a customer of Patagonia for longer than I've been teaching here at UF, and I remember more than a decade ago, I started seeing these very small, smaller than a postage stamp size tags on the clothing that I was buying that said 1% for the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could start. I have a couple parts to this question, but I was wondering if you could start by giving us an idea of what the impact of that 1% is each year. For example, there's a local startup here in town called Fracture. They print photographs on glass, and they were started by two UF students. And this year they're launching a 1% program as part of 1% for the Planet, and that's going to end up for them being about $14 million this year. And so I'm and 1% of that, so like $140,000 in terms of giving, which is not a small amount of giving. But I'm guessing for Patagonia, your giving is in the millions. And so I just wondered if you could give us some sense of quantification.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has added up over the years. There's no question. I mean, I think maybe people would have an awareness of, 2 years ago we had a Black Friday event where we ended up donating 100% of our revenue that day from our retail store, from all of our retail stores and online to grassroots nonprofits. And so that ended up being, I think that was one day in excess of $10 million.
Yeah.
The thing about 1% for the Planet, and Patagonia is not the only 1% member, but you can, any business can join 1% for the Planet, and basically that is a pledge to 1% of your revenue. So good years or bad, it's 1% of revenue, not profit, but revenue. So that's an important distinction, I feel like. So it adds up. I think at the end of that year, we ended up having, I want to say it was close to $20 million that was slated to go to grassroots nonprofits. And the trick of that, of course, is that you're talking about a pretty large amount. I mean, you could probably start in a decent-sized endowment with that, I would think. That could do some work, and you're giving that away in small amounts to small groups. So that itself becomes this kind of logistical exercise of really having enough people to make sure that we're looking at all the increase in grant applications that come in and having those relationships with those nonprofits. So it's a big piece of the mission. But yeah, 1% adds up. 1% of revenue, it adds up quick.
So that's actually what I was going to ask about next. Is I understand that supporting grassroots projects with that 1% is really important to you. It's not like you give $10 million to World Wildlife Fund and let them figure out what to do with it.
Right.
You really like to support those grassroots projects yourselves. And I wondered if you could share about why grassroots efforts are important to you all at Patagonia. I mean, we know that you support and very much care about the environment, but why specifically grassroots projects? And which ones maybe right now? Because I know you mentioned Everglades or.
Yeah, we have. I mean, we have a variety of grassroots. So I mean, the grassroots are people who are viscerally connected to whatever that issue is. When you have people in their community who are connected to whatever that problem is, or they're connected to the symptoms of that problem. I mean, those are the folks who are most interested in attacking the source of the problem. And so, those small groups of people they're not worried. They're more concerned about the problem than maybe the logistics of being an organization or things like that can start to take up time and money and energy and effort. Which is, and it's a balancing act. We don't. There are larger organizations that do important long-term things, but we really feel like the action, that direct action, comes from those grassroots. And so, like just that word action, we just recently launched this Patagonia Action Works website, which is a thing that allows people to connect to the grassroots groups who are in the area, so that if you are, wherever you live, you can either look up things that are by issue, or you can look it up through your locale and find out who's working on what, so that you can lend a shoulder to the effort. And so, yeah, there are a variety of issues that we work on. Relatively locally anyway, I have friends over on the East Coast who are working on Everglades restoration, and that was that was part of my connection to being here. Really, was having this connection to these folks in Florida, both as an angler because I care about just the amazing resource from just that pure sport point of view, and also the long-term health of that thing to not just to my business unit as a fly fishing business, but there are lots and lots of people who depend on the health of that. So yeah, we have those connections, with Bull Sugar in Stewart, and with Captains for Clean Water, and with the Everglades Foundation. And they're certainly larger than Bull Sugar or Captains for Clean Water, but they're all partners in that same fight, and they all play vital roles. So.
As a Florida resident, I think we could all agree that the health of the Everglades is really critical to all of our health and well-being because it ties in with our water, our
Right.
aquifer, and our ecosystem, and
not just
health of the
not
planet.
just
So yeah, not just for fly fishers.
not just entertainment purposes, right?
So you mentioned something that you did on Black Friday a few years ago. I wanted to ask if you could share the reason behind and the impact of your 2011 Don't Buy This Jacket campaign. I believe it launched the day after Thanksgiving, which is known as Black Friday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Don't Buy This Jacket was really, again, that answer to, marketing is telling the story of who we are. Certainly, you can't buy enough sustainable X to get out of the environmental crisis. It's not something we're going to buy our way out of. And so really the idea that maybe the thing that you own and the thing you already have and the thing you're using is really the best thing environmentally. And while we are in business, and we're a business that does rely on growth to be healthy, a healthy growth, a planned growth. But that was really motivated by trying to instill this idea of no, we really believe that if you don't need it, you shouldn't buy it. And so we're going to try to make things that are, that will stand the test of time from a fashion point of view, which, turns out that's oftentimes very unfashion, and so it'll go in and out of fashion. But, we try to build functional things. We try to build repairable things. We try to build long-lasting things from that usability point of view. So it's not such a now color or cut that you won't want to wear it in a year or 2 years. And so Don't Buy This Jacket was really an answer to that. Going back to sort of my early days when I was on the outside just as a climber, and one of the things that really cemented my love of Patagonia as a young climber was that one of the first catalogs I really remember, I opened up the catalog, and the first page there was an essay, so this long-term storytelling piece. It was this essay, and the essay was entitled Reality Check, and it just said, reality check. Everything we make pollutes, period. Everything we make, costs the planet more than we can give back to it. And so what should we do? What should we make? And this was probably, I can't remember the exact date, but it was late 80s, early 90s, like 1990, 91 maybe. That idea of really struck me as, what the hell kind of company is this? They're saying, hey, everything that we make pollutes. And, and I think that that's part of being being a responsible company is really being honest with yourself and knowing we're not perfect. We're not trying to put ourselves out there as perfect. And so that, Vincent Stanley, who co-authored Responsible Company with Yvonne, who wrote much of that copy in those early years and ongoing years in Patagonia, he really was the voice there, and so those are pieces that stand the test of time.
Yeah, I was remembering when that book first came out around 2010, and I had been teaching sustainable business for at least 5 years by then, and there were all these Forbes and Wall Street Journal and HBR articles with the headline, Patagonia founder says there's no such thing as sustainable
Right.
business.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, like,
Yeah.
and it's a valid point, something we're all working towards, but it's a moving target.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I understand that you don't view Patagonia's civic and environmental actions as branding or cause marketing. We just talked about that they're really at the very heart of everything you do at Patagonia. And in recent weeks, there's been a lot of comparison in the media regarding brands who are taking stands on issues from gun control to social justice. And it seems as if those companies are taking a page from the Patagonia playbook. I was wondering if you could talk about the President Stole Your Land campaign that launched in response to President Trump's announcement last November to drastically cut, I think it was like by 85%, the size of Utah's Bears Ears National Monument and other public lands. I was wondering if you could share with us how in the world you pulled that campaign together in just like 5 days and what the response has been.
Well, I mean, Bears Ears was something that we had been working on. I mean, we had worked with local climber groups and other, stakeholders in that community that considered that land really important, whether it was important from a cultural or religious point of view, in the sense of like First Nations people, or it was significant for climbers and people who really look to it as a place of being able to go out and have, these experiences in nature and solitude and beauty. All of those things that feed us, that
National Monument for a reason.
Make us human, right? And so, we had worked on getting the additional protection, getting that designated as national monument, right? So adding to those. To the protections. It already was public land, but adding that layer of protection to it. And so, that it wasn't outside the realm of imagination that the incoming administration might have been hostile to that idea. And so I think it's something where, you're thinking, okay, if this happens, what will our response be, and how will we do this? And again, like in keeping with, really the idea that that Patagonia is made up of all these people who have these deeply held beliefs, that they personally have their own, ethos that they bring to the company, and that collectively we make up this organism. I think that's a big part of, how do you get that response together in that amount of time, is because people really feel like, wow, this is a pretty incredible attack on a thing, and we felt like it was an unprecedented use of presidential power, sort of in the reverse with the Antiquities Act. And you can dive into way more of it online. Like if you search Patagonia public lands, I think one of the top, if you do that in a search engine, I think one of the top things that come up is that, the details of suing the Trump administration over this issue. But yeah, I mean, and as far as the response on it was absolutely galvanizing to our people who look for us to be outspoken in those ways. And that's something that, we have a long history of being outspoken, and we have a history of engaging in those fights. So there was that response, and then there was obviously some other fairly well publicized responses from the natural resources branch of the current administration. I saw we have a photo of a mug that was spied in one of the offices there, and it looks like it's a Patagonia logo, except for it says propaganda, and it's from one of the staffers in the administration. And I remember seeing that with some friends, and I was like, man, how do I get me one of those propaganda mugs? I really want to get, we're pretty unabashed, I think when it comes to saying, hey, we are public land advocates. In fact, there was an article that just came out, it either came out today or yesterday in Field and Stream, that featured Yvonne sitting down with the founder of First Light, which is a hunting group, a hunting manufacturer, clothing manufacturer, and they met up at this backcountry hunters and anglers rendezvous, but just talking about public lands, they're a really important part of the ability to engage in these activities, but not only sport, but these things that feed us, these things that keep our water clean, these things that protect land from excessive
soil, as you were just
from
mentioning
spoil.
from the beginning.
Right, and I think one of the points that's made in that article is that 90% of public lands are open to resource extraction, and there's only 10% that are set aside for these kinds of things that feed us, and so being forceful about that is something I think we're pretty unapologetic about.
So you were just sharing about how politics matter, and I know that all Patagonia stores closed for Election Day of 2016, and this summer you announced that you plan to do so again this November for midterms. I read that your CEO recently wrote, "Democracy needs our support more than ever because it's under attack." Can you talk a little bit more about politics at Patagonia and how the company sees its role in, say, encouraging customers to vote for the environment or speaking out against the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord, those kinds of issues?
Yeah, I mean, again, like coming back to the idea of telling the story of who we are. I mean, those values, I mean, are critical to to our company, and they're critical to our survival. So the protecting our land, air, and water, we feel like that's a fairly important issue, and so engaging people and saying your voice in this matters. That like what we're doing on election day is closing the offices again, closing our stores again, and encouraging people and running up to the election, just encouraging people to make sure that you know where you're registered to vote. Like that's one of the things where it's a breakdown when you show up on election day. You're like, no, I'm registered to vote. And you're like, oh no.
And that's not uncommon for students.
Right.
Sometimes they're registered in their home counties, and
yeah,
then
there's
they're
all kinds
here
of
in
things.
Alachua County, which that might be a challenge for them to
Right.
look into soon to be registered here in Alachua County.
Yeah. So I mean, knowing where you're registered to vote. It used to be people would say like, oh yeah, make sure you're registered to vote. But now we're saying, hey, make sure you know where you're registered to vote so that you can go and vote. Make sure that you have a plan when you go to vote, that you understand these issues.
Look at a sample ballot.
Yes, look at a sample ballot. And of course, because we advocate for clean air, land, and water, we're like, hey, go check out what the League of Conservation Voters says. I think, interesting in the run-up to the midterms, like our friends at Bull Sugar, they put out a voter guide, and that voter guide was focused on they were trying to just be really transparent about Republicans and Democrats who are taking sugar money or aren't taking sugar money, Republicans and Democrats who have been supporting the fight for clean water in all these different forms. And they had yard signs made that sort of had these check boxes, and one was, it was Democrat, Republican, water, and the check mark was in water. And so, I feel like in that fight in particular, there is a really great coalition of people who are interested in seeing this problem solved, and they absolutely run the full political spectrum, and they recognize the value of the commons to everyone and the importance of that. And so, we may have our our propaganda where we believe that climate change is happening and is real and people are feeling the impacts of, and if we don't do the things that we know we need to do, that these are the things that will happen as a result, and they're not going to be good things. I mean, we're unapologetic about advocating for that, but there are lots of people who are willing to fight for it, and so our take is do get involved, do make sure that you do show up and you do cast your vote for people who who value these things as well.
Which is atypical because I think a lot of businesses think, oh, like, we don't want to get involved in politics because we don't want to potentially lose half of our customers or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. And like in the fly fish space, I can tell you, through my social media channels, I can see when I push hard on something, we'll get a spectrum of responses because there's lots of people who are like, man, I love your jacket. It is the best fly fishing jacket that there is. Now just quit talking about politics.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well,
Can't do that.
We kind of have a history of it, so.
Yeah. So I have one more question, but I think we're going to turn it over to Professor Barnett for student questions.
Yes,
and then I'll ask mine at the end.
Please line up for questions. I'm sure you must have some questions. And I think I should ask something very obvious because our students may be too polite to ask this question. But since we do have so many students in the audience, Chris, I wanted to ask before we get started on the Q&A, what advice do you have for young people, for students who are thinking, wow, I'd like to work at that company where one gets off when the waves are high? What is your advice? What is any advice you have for getting the foot in the door? Do you have internships? What does that look like?
Sure. I mean, we do have an internship program, absolutely, and that's something to be aware of. I wish I had the deadlines in my brain for it, but it is something that happens typically in the summer, so the deadlines are far out from that. And I'm sure there's information on our website about it, about internships, because we do get so many queries about it. One thing I'll say, and this is true not only of I would say internships, but of any prospective employees. It's like, they're absolutely looking for your connection to, these things that are important in the natural world. And so pursuing those things and being involved in them, finding the places to get involved in your backyard, in your community, in your locality. And it doesn't matter what you're into, whether you're in finance or you're in whatever. There's some role that you can take up in in a local group, or if you don't find one, you start your own. Whatever it is, that's a piece that really is becoming much more important.
So it's important to have a passion.
That element of activism is important, and having that passion. And that doesn't mean you got to be walking down the street with a sign, but are you using your talents to further something that you believe in? That's a critical piece.
I'm so glad to see there are questions. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Hi. I can hear you anyway.
Hello? Okay. Just had to click the button. All right. Thank you so much for the speech. I really appreciate that your Patagonia is trying to be more sustainable and all that, and I really appreciate that. So I have two questions. The first one is, so you're working primarily in fly fishing, but I kind of feel like that, and there's research behind this, that it's sort of bad for the environment to fish, So I'm just wondering how do you work that into your brand, because you're advocating for fishing, but also for environmentalism. So.
If I understand your question correctly, are you talking about impacts on fisheries or like what?
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Yeah, like
clarify
on our water sources, fisheries and stuff like that, from fishing, overfishing, or things like that,
Well, I think that there's a variety of fishing. There's certainly overfishing, there's overharvest, there's all kinds of things like that, and then there are ways of understanding the resource and being responsible about it. So, like one of my ambassadors is a UMass PhD in fisheries, and he's somebody that we consult with on best practices and understanding like mortality and catch and release and all of those things. So, the connection, I feel like that connection that people have from those activities is one that is a deep and abiding and visceral connection to the watershed and to those environments and to the overall health So participating in the sport in that way, where you really have this kind of whole view and whole understanding of that system, of that watershed, which is something I think, most of the fly anglers that I know are engaged in that way. They understand what makes for good fishing, and usually what makes for good fishing is a healthy watershed. I feel like that connection outweighs, those other impacts. And also, like we are engaged in a variety of things that are outside of fly fishing as well. With as a company and as a category within the company, we engage on a variety of things. Like we're involved in fighting for a good reauthorization of the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which has helped rebuild fish stocks. And that's something that we're at odds with other people that we have been conservation partners with, and they're fighting for kind of a loosening of those restrictions, and we're fighting for maintaining much of what is in place because Magnuson-Stevens has been so good at rebuilding depleted fish stocks and protecting that resource. So, I feel like we sort of cast a wide net, even if it's not something that is directly connected to fly fish, and that advocacy is positive. So I think it's a net positive.
Sorry, Chris. Could I ask you to hand the microphone to the student behind? I think we only have time for one question per student. I'm sorry about that.
Hopefully that's
person.
That's a good answer for you.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Samantha, and I run a local startup. We are a plant-based soup company, so we gathered some of the world's most healthful ingredients like adaptogenic mushrooms and turmeric. And my question is that we believe in the quality of our ingredients, but we also believe in the packaging and limiting the harm that we take responsibility for as a company. So we house them in glass jars and advocate for their reuse. These are also refrigerated. So you can see the price starts to go up with a refrigerated glass house soup product. And as we launch online sales, we chose a also ethical shipping company that uses biodegradable packaging insulators, and the price continues to go up. Now we have a demand for our product, but I guess that my question to you is how to navigate that launch. While we're still a startup, so we can't utilize bulk buying and these types of things that offset your labor costs and all of these things that go into it. So in this launch and this high price point, I really want to be transparent with our customers that we're doing the best that we can, but we're not going to compromise our quality to get this to your doorstep. Do you have any advice on how to navigate that? Is there a point of too much transparency?
Well, I mean, it's just in your explanation or asking of the question, I feel like you did a great job of sort of answering the question, which is letting your customers know we don't want to compromise the quality of this, and at this scale, this is what is the answer for us. We went through this exercise with our base layer product where we used to do this thing called the sushi roll, where the base layer was rolled up and it just had a rubber band because we're trying to avoid the packaging. When I first worked in outdoor retail, Patagonia Capilene famously came in this nearly indestructible plastic pouch. Now, the nice thing about it was so obviously nearly indestructible that you kept it and used it. Like I used mine and reused them, etc. Well, they tried to solve this problem with sushi roll. And then we came to a point where that sushi roll was not competitive. It was not doing well in the marketplace because everybody else is putting their product out in a box and doing these big displays and all of those things. So as a business, if you're not being competitive, is it helpful to have your product rolled up that people don't want to unroll and try on? And so, it turns out that there's a lot of energy and, the carbon footprint of making something is this big. And if that thing is then destroyed in transit, it gets soiled and can't be sold, you've now lost all the human capital and natural resources that went into creating it. And so in that context, the plastic bag that we put around it is worth it. The math works out for protecting the investment in that product. And I would say that you're in the same boat. If this is what we value all of these things, and in order to deliver this product in the way that we think is right, this is what we're doing, and we're going to try to get better as our scale allows, So is there too much transparency? I mean, that's a question that every business has to answer for themselves. But I think that that straightforwardness is really what people value, and they appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you for being here. I'm the co-founder of Livestream. It's a local startup that allows you to empower people to fight climate change by allowing them to track and reduce their carbon footprint. And most people are not.
I have to ask you to repeat that. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
It's okay.
So, Livestream, we empower people to fight climate change by allowing them to track their daily footprint and reduce it to help them better understand their source of footprint. And most Americans are not aware of where their source of footprint come from. Such as an example, 3% of the world footprint comes from clothing. A lot of people are not aware of that. Do you believe that companies should be more open about, transparent about their footprint of their clothing when purchasing? And also, how do you use marketing to tell the story of a problem that people might not familiar with, like at the environmental impact of clothing? Thank you.
Well, yeah, your question is a great one, and I think in terms of carbon footprint, that's one of the reasons why companies really have this responsibility, is that the manufacturing of things is a huge piece of our carbon footprint as people. Our carbon footprints individually it's not to be ignored, and people tracking their carbon footprint through the choices they make, that's really critical. But I feel like, industry is the bigger mood swing of carbon. And so, I live in a drought-ridden area right now, and probably into the future, the way things are going. And there are always these campaigns of turn off your water when you're taking a shower and everything. The fact is that has minuscule impacts on drought. What really has an impact on drought is monocrop farming practices in the Central Valley, where they've ruined the soil. They've ruined the soil's ability to absorb water. They're growing water-thirsty crops that they're then exporting as a cash crop and things like that. So these bigger impacts of agriculture, and that's one of the reasons why our company is engaged in this idea of regenerative organic agriculture. We need to get the carbon out of the air, get the carbon in the soil. It helps it hold water. So those small pieces, it's great for people to track and have an awareness of that the choices they make matter. And so, we hope that if they understand that they buy something that maybe is from a company that is focused on creating something that is closer to carbon neutral, or even, carbon negative, if that's possible, through. So I don't know if I'm answering your question adequately, but that awareness is really helpful. But it's these large-scale pieces that really move the meter, and why it's so important for companies, bigger players, to be responsible. And I hope that filters down to people, and they're like, that's why I'm engaged with this company, because they're trying to actually move this, both from a top-level awareness point of view, from how they manufacture, and just engaging with their customers on it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to UF. My question is more on the supply chain side. So when Patagonia is expanding into new markets and expanding its manufacturing plants, what's its strategy in using local resources in being environmentally conscious?
Well, it's another great question. Obviously, having things that are far flung, if raw materials come from some distant place, and et cetera, that adds to the carbon footprint. I don't work that deep in our supply chain to be able to tell you what the calculus is on that, but there is a vast group of people who do work on that math and do add all of those features up. But I can say, at least generally, that we're always looking to tighten up that that supply chain, again, for the same reasons in the question that I just answered, is that those are the parts of making things that do create the biggest carbon footprint. You know, and it's not just carbon; it's water use. It's all of those things. So, you know, we're always looking on improving those efficiencies and really being as tight and as local as possible with those supply chains. You know, now that said, of course, our supply chain is global, and so our product is made all around the world, and ultimately it has to end up, you know, at our distribution center. So there's always that transport and all of those things that add up into it as well. But I'm assuming that you're really talking about that raw material, and yeah, I mean, we try to keep that as tight as possible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming. My question is, a lot of people, I think one of the biggest hurdles for the environmental movement is that a lot of people view it as cost prohibitive, both for consumers and businesses. Is that a hurdle you have to address in your marketing? And if so, how do you go about it?
I mean, yeah, price is one of those things that a consumer or a customer will look at, and so you know, being competitive it still matters. So like the line that one of the lines that I'm marketing manager for is our workwear line, and we have built, you know, this product. We're making double knee canvas pants. You know, now we're building our canvas pants out of hemp and organic cotton and recycled poly, and then those are sewn in a fair trade factory. So automatically we're incurring or investing in, however you want to look at it, we're incurring costs or investing in something that we think is important in the long haul. But we still have to, you know, convince sort of an idealized workwear customer who's going to go out and basically they're going to buy these things to destroy them. They're buying them to work, and they're buying them to ruin, essentially. And we have to convince them that this is worth your $79 versus the $39 that you might pay for a competing brand that's not built with that same mindset. And so we try to educate people on the value of hemp. We try to educate them on that hemp is one of the most durable natural fibers, that canvas, the word canvas is actually derived from the word cannabis, that is where original canvas came from, and that it's a crop that, you know, can help restore soil. It doesn't use a lot of water. It doesn't require a lot of inputs. So we're trying to sell that full value of this thing, and then on top of that, it turns out that it's 25% more abrasion resistant than regular cotton canvas, and that we back it with a guarantee and we repair it. So we try to tell the full story, and it's still up to the customer to decide, is that of value? And I saw another product for American-made denim, and I think there's one plant left in the country that's making denim. And we released denim this fall that was made at Cone Mill's White Oak plant, and then it got shut down in December by the capital group that bought it. But the denim that we were making, that's organic cotton that was grown in Texas, and then it was milled into denim in the Carolinas with natural dye stuff from Kentucky, and then sewn into clothing in Los Angeles. And so we try to tell that story so people will say, okay, I understand. This is the cost of making something here in America out of things that we think are good, and in a process that's good. And it's a long process to convince people of, like, here's what it costs to do things well. We've become addicted to cheap things, and so it's a process. I wish I had a clear, bolt of lightning answer for that, but it's definitely a process. Education.
So we'll have one last student question, and then Dr. Joyce is going to ask one last question. Go ahead.
The ultimate.
Again, thank you for being here. I just had a question regarding, you mentioned Patagonia's kind of focus on water use, specifically in Florida. How does Patagonia collaborate with organizations like Captains for Clean Water or bull sugar, like your hat indicates. What do you guys do to promote sustainability within kind of? It is a very tight knit group. How do you guys work together?
I mean, we work together on a really grassroots and direct way. I mean, conversations on the phone, conversations in person, talking to them about what their upcoming strategies are, or in their initiatives, how they think about doing it, and then also we support them materially. I mean, we support them with money. To help fund what they're doing, because the more you have to be focused on fundraising, the less you can dedicate to the outreach and the education and all those pieces. So it's a collaborative process, and depending on the organization, I have more in the weeds kind of direct contact with them, and so like with Bull Sugar, I have a really close relationship with those folks. Like last year, I took representatives from Bull Sugar to all the consumer fly fishing shows that we went to. So I had them with me in Denver. I had them with me in New Jersey. I had them in Atlanta. I had them in Pleasanton, California. And they were talking about what's going on here in the Everglades, because when I look at it, I always refer to it as the calculus, and I'm a terrible math person, so maybe that's not even the right term. But, when I look at all the pieces of the puzzle, politics, agriculture practices, different user groups, water, all of these things, they're coming together everywhere around the country. I have similar fights going on in Montana. There's a similar fight that's brewing on the Edisto River. There's all these things happening all over. So I try to get my customers to understand, hey, what's happening here matters, because this is repeating itself over and over. And it's only going to be exacerbated by things like climate change. Layer that on top of it, and then you start seeing where it's important for my customers and the people who are looking to us to understand what's going on in the Everglades is important, because there's only one Everglades. They're a jewel, and not only that, but these other estuaries matter too, like the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie, and I go and I fish there with people, and I see it firsthand, and I'm like, man, this is great, and unique, and so it's as direct connection as possible, and that's the beauty, I think, of working with the grassroots. It's like we all speak the same language, we care about the same things, and we really are face to face with each other. So. And I wish that I had more time to invest there, because the dividends are huge, and they're really important.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So I have one last question,
Okay.
and my intention is for it to be super concise and easy for you.
Okay.
And it touches on at least 2, maybe 3 of the students' questions. So one of my very favorite quotes is by Anna Lappe, who said, "Every time you spend money, you're casting a vote for the kind of world you want." And Patagonia really seems to exemplify this quote, and also remind us all as consumers, when we're in the marketplace making decisions, that we really have that power. So I was hoping that in closing, before Professor Barnett closes with us, if you could offer the students in the room one piece of advice or wisdom or a quote that's been inspirational to you in your career.
Man, it's one of those things where I'm like, wait, there's so many. Why can't I think of one? I think. Well, in that original catalog piece where I read Reality Check, there was that sort of, there was the reality check of everything we make pollutes. But right next to that, and this was one of the reasons why I pulled that out, and I carried it around with me for years and years, and I brought that tear out of the catalog with me to my first day at Patagonia and stuck it on my board there, some 30 plus years later, I suppose. And that was a quote from Johann Goethe, which was just about, find that thing that you love and examine it from every angle, that like choose one thing or very few things and just examine them from every side, because that's what makes the poet, the artist, the human being. And I feel like that singularity, that really, examining yourself, finding the things that you love, the thing that you would be willing to suffer for more than anything, that you will fight for, that you will invest in at all costs. That is the piece that takes you where you need to go. It's a very helpful filter, to answer, to put questions through or situations through for yourself. And that ends up being the answer, which is mirrored in nature. Like everything in nature just struggles to be exactly what it is. It fights to be exactly what it is at all costs, to adapt, or is not really. I mean, resiliency and all of that stuff aside, a tree just tries to be a tree. It doesn't try to be grass. It doesn't try to be a tule. So we should do the same things.
I love ending on Gertrude. That was just beautiful. So I think that's a nice way for us to end as well, to remember that we all do the best we can, and you don't have to be Patagonia to create this ethos that's needed, this change that's needed, right? It's in each one of us. And Chris, we so thank you for coming to Gainesville, and I have to say, you definitely hit the company's mission of inspiring through business. So thank you so much. Thank you.